February 2018, the Federal Reserve did something it had never done before to a bank of this size. It told Wells Fargo to stop growing. A hard cap of $1.95 trillion on total assets. The bank had to freeze in place. No new branches, no expanding the loan book, no acquiring competitors. Just stand there while everyone else kept moving. At the time, Wells Fargo had roughly $1.93 trillion in assets. They were already right at the ceiling. The Fed wasn't telling them to shrink. It was telling them you cannot get any bigger until you prove you can run a bank without hurting your own customers. That was 7 years ago. The cap is still there. And what happened in the years since explains why this one punishment, more than any fine, more than any congressional hearing, is the thing that actually worked. Let's go back to September 2016. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau announced a $185 million fine against Wells Fargo. The allegation was unprecedented. Over 5,300 employees opened more than 2 million deposit and credit card accounts that customers never asked for. They moved money from real accounts to fund the fake ones. They forged signatures. They created fake email addresses and fake PINs. Customers started noticing fees they couldn't explain. Some saw their credit scores drop from credit cards they never applied for. The scale was not a few bad apples. This was a machine designed to produce fake accounts at industrial scale. The machine had a name. It was called the GR8, later simplified to 8 is great. Every Wells Fargo customer was supposed to have 8 different financial products with the bank: checking account, savings account, credit card, mortgage, auto loan, home equity line, investment account, insurance. The entire retail banking division was structured around this one metric. Branch managers had daily cross-sell quotas. Tellers had them. Call center workers had them. Regional directors had them. Performance reviews, bonuses, promotions and firings all ran through how many products per customer you could push. If you hit your numbers, you were a star. If you did not, you were gone. Employees described being fired for missing cross-sell targets by a single percentage point. Some reported working 7 days a week, skipping lunch, and still being told they were not doing enough. One whistleblower testified that she was instructed to open accounts for family members, including her own teenage daughter, just to make the numbers. Another said her manager told the team that if they did not hit their quotas, the bank would find people who would. The pressure was not subtle, it was the entire culture. And when the numbers did not add up, 5,300 employees made them add up by opening accounts that did not exist. What Wells Fargo told Congress when this broke matters because of what happened next. CEO John Stumpf sat before the Senate Banking Committee and said the fake accounts were the work of a few bad employees who had been dealt with. He said the culture was strong. He said the bank had caught the problem early and fixed it. Senator Elizabeth Warren told him to his face that he should resign and give back the money. He did not. He stayed for another month, then retired with a package worth roughly $130 million. The head of the retail banking division, Carrie Tolstedt, the executive who had overseen the cross-sell machine for nearly a decade, left with a package worth roughly $125 million. Both later had millions clawed back. But the message at the top was clear even before the clawbacks. You can preside over the largest consumer fraud in American banking history and still walk away rich. But here's what the bad apples explanation couldn't account for. Within months of the fake account settlement, regulators found the exact same pattern in another division. This time, it was auto loans. Wells Fargo had signed 800,000 customers up for auto insurance they didn't need, layering the cost into their monthly car payments. When customers couldn't afford the now inflated bills, the bank repossessed their cars. 25,000 customers had their vehicles taken. Some of them were fully current on their actual car payments. They just couldn't pay for the auto insurance they never asked for. Then it was mortgages. Wells Fargo had charged customers fees to lock in mortgage rates, then failed to process the loans fast enough, causing the rate locks to expire. When customers asked what happened, the bank blamed them for the delay and charged them additional fees to extend the lock. This wasn't a mistake. Internal documents showed the bank had built the fee structure, knowing the processing delays would cause lock expirations. They were collecting on both ends. Then it was overdraft fees. Wells Fargo was running customers' transactions from largest to smallest instead of chronologically, maximizing the number of overdrafts per day. A customer making 5 small purchases and 1 large one would get hit with 1 overdraft if processed in order. Processed largest first, the big purchase drained the account, and all 5 small ones triggered separate fees. They settled that one for $205 million. At this point, a pattern should have been obvious. But every time regulators announced a new settlement, Wells Fargo's executives told investors the problems were isolated, old news, already fixed. The bank had learned its lesson and was moving forward. Tim Sloan replaced Stumpf as CEO in October 2016. He was a 30-year Wells Fargo veteran, which meant he had been inside the bank during the entire period the fake accounts machine was running. He told Congress in 2017 that the bank had changed fundamentally. He spent 2 years saying the problems were behind them. In March 2019, facing sustained pressure from lawmakers who did not believe him, Sloan stepped down. The bank brought in Charlie Scharf, an outsider from Bank of New York Mellon, specifically to signal that things would be different. Scharf had the job of cleaning up a mess he didn't create, which is not unusual for a turnaround CEO. What was unusual was how the mess kept growing even after he arrived. In 2022, Wells Fargo settled a lawsuit alleging that the bank had conducted fake job interviews. For years, managers had been required to interview diverse candidates for open positions as part of a diversity initiative announced with considerable fanfare. But internal whistleblowers said the interviews were a sham. The hiring decisions had already been made before the interviews ever happened. Diverse candidates were brought in, interviewed, and rejected for jobs that were never actually open to them. The bank paid out a settlement and said it was committed to real change. The same words they had used after the fake accounts, after the auto loans, after the mortgages, after the overdrafts. The difference with the fake interviews was the layer of cynicism it revealed. This was not pressure cooker sales targets making frontline employees desperate. This was managers in hiring positions deliberately going through the motions of a policy the bank publicly celebrated while privately undermining it. It suggested the problem was not isolated to one division or one incentive structure. The rot had spread beyond sales culture into how the bank managed its own workforce. Let's step back and look at what this actually cost them in dollars. Between 2016 and 2023, Wells Fargo paid over $15 billion in fines, settlements, and penalties, spanning at least a dozen different regulatory actions. The CFPB's $3.7 billion penalty in December 2022 was the largest fine in the agency's history. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency hit them with a separate action. The Securities and Exchange Commission filed charges. The Department of Justice launched investigations. State attorneys general lined up. And through all of it, the fines kept being described by analysts as manageable, a cost of doing business. The bank had a market cap of over $200 billion. $15 billion in fines over 7 years is roughly $1 billion a quarter. Painful, but absorbable. The bank earned more than that in net income most quarters. You can deduct penalties from revenue. You cannot deduct a growth cap, which is why the asset cap matters more than all of it. When the Fed imposed that $1.95 trillion ceiling in 2018, Wells Fargo was the third largest bank in America. JP Morgan Chase sat at about $2.6 trillion. Bank of America was around $2.3 trillion. In the years since, JP Morgan grew to $3.9 trillion. Bank of America crossed $3.2 trillion. Wells Fargo is still at $1.9 trillion because it is not allowed to grow past that number. The bank hasn't just lost market share, it has lost the ability to compete for it. Every year the cap stays, the distance between Wells Fargo and its competitors widens. That distance is measured in hundreds of billions of dollars in assets they cannot hold, loans they cannot make, deposits they cannot accept, and revenue they cannot generate. The math is brutal. JP Morgan added roughly $1.3 trillion in assets while Wells Fargo was frozen. That's a bank 2/3 the size of Wells Fargo that Wells Fargo didn't get to become. The stock market reflects this. From 2018 to 2025, JP Morgan's stock roughly tripled. Bank of America more than doubled. Wells Fargo, even recovering from scandal lows, significantly underperformed both. Investors weren't just worried about fines, they were pricing in a permanently smaller bank. The bank has tried repeatedly to get the cap lifted. Charlie Scharf has made it a stated priority. In congressional testimony, in earnings calls, in investor presentations, the message is the same. We've changed. We've invested in compliance. We've overhauled risk management. We've fired the people responsible. We've spent billions on controls. The Federal Reserve has not been convinced. A Bloomberg report in 2024 cited Fed officials privately signaling that the cap would stay until regulators saw sustained proof that the bank's risk controls were functioning independently of executive pressure. Not a plan, not a promise. Proof over years. And the Fed has leverage that doesn't expire. This is not a fine with a due date. It's not a consent order with a sunset clause. The asset cap stays until the Federal Reserve decides it comes off. The Fed doesn't answer to shareholders. It doesn't report quarterly earnings. It can wait. Meanwhile, the bank's reputation has become a crisis in its own right. Wells Fargo spent decades marketing itself as the trustworthy bank. The stagecoach, the frontier history, the wholesome Midwestern roots, all of it designed to signal stability and integrity. After the fake accounts, a Harris poll ranked Wells Fargo second to last among American brands in consumer trust, behind only the Trump Organization. An Axios Harris survey in 2023 found Wells Fargo still ranked among the least trusted brands in the country. The brand equity that took a century to build was turned into a liability inside of 5 years. Every new headline, every new settlement, every new scandal reinforced the same message. This bank cannot be trusted. The bank disclosed in 2023 that it was still operating under 10 separate consent orders from various regulators, each one requiring ongoing oversight, audits, and remediation. The OCC terminated one of those in early 2025 related to anti-money laundering controls, signaling progress on at least one front. But the asset cap is tied to broader governance failures, not just individual program deficiencies. One consent order lifted doesn't move the cap. Here's what makes this story different from most corporate accountability narratives. The punishment is actually working. The fines didn't do it. Wells Fargo could absorb fines. They are a balance sheet item. The asset cap is not. The asset cap takes away the thing a bank exists to do in the first place: grow. The question isn't really whether the cap will eventually come off. It probably will. Regulators aren't going to keep a major bank in permanent stasis. The question is what Wells Fargo looks like when it does. A bank that spent a decade standing still while its competitors doubled. A bank whose name became synonymous with corporate fraud. A bank whose own advertising can't mention trust without invoking a decade of evidence to the contrary. A bank whose internal culture was so broken that even a diversity hiring initiative became another scandal. $15 billion in fines created headlines. Congressional hearings created moments of outrage. The asset cap created consequences. And 7 years later, it is still the only thing Wells Fargo has ever been unable to buy its way out of.